I guess they did something on the Road Warrior Buck and his balding brother did something on their little YouTube show they do with their friends that has teased and foretold the coming of the former Revival. They gave some kind of cue or hint or something, didn't they?
They did. I didn't watch it because, unlike a lot of fans of the modern stuff, I think that show they do on YouTube is one of the worst pieces of garbage I've ever seen. There's nothing worse than wrestlers who think they can do comedy and they can't, and it's just weird, lame wrestling humor that doesn't work. That show is garbage, but apparently at the very end of it,
I didn't ask you to give a whole review now, and everybody that listens to this already knew that's what you were going to say because that's a fair assessment of the program, but I just asked you about a tease for our friends, the Revival.
What I meant to say is, by the way, that show, pure garbage. But at the very end, apparently in the clouds, they saw FTR in the clouds, signifying the impending...
Are you sure somebody wasn't trying to deliver them some flowers? Oh, that's FTD. I forgot. Well, anyway... Stop it now. Whether they're going to be the Revival or the Revolt or whatever, we lie, and I can't remember what their new names are. And goddamn, now
it's the Revolt. And by the way, right there is the program: the Revolt versus the Revolting on AEW.
Well, I see what you did there. The point is, I like these guys, and I can't even remember what to call them anymore because now they've changed their Christian names. Plus, I knew Dawson when he had his previous name, which I don't even know whether he even admits to anymore or not. But I've known him under a variety of assumed names. But the point is, every time that something like that is teased, then it starts on Twitter, and I get emails, and everybody, are you going to manage the Revival? Is it? And even Uncle Dave chipped in this past week on his, I guess in his newsletter, he said, unless Cornette has been perpetrating a work of biblical proportions, he's not going to AEW. And for once, Dave's right on the nose on that. But everybody, and I wanted to try to explain, it's not, even if in a perfect world, ladies and gentlemen, if competent, adult, serious professionals were the executive vice presidents of All Elite Wrestling instead of Kenny Olivier and the Road Warrior Bucks, I would still not be the manager of the Revival in All Elite Wrestling on a full-time basis. And that's never been something that was going to happen. I've said on the program a couple weeks ago, I would love to manage the Revival on an independent show. Once there are such a thing again, it would have to be of some level of professionalism with a halfway decent crowd, something like a WrestleCade or something where, those guys have a big building and draw a great crowd, or somewhat, Bobby Fulton's new building. I haven't seen it yet, but if it's new, it's better than the old one up there. But somewhere where there's going to be a legitimate crowd and a legitimate facility, I think they'd like it. If I managed them, I think I'd like it if I managed them against a decent quality tag team. That would be fun to do that once. It was never going to be a situation where even if people that I was in love with, even if Bobby Fulton inherited $1 billion and opened All Elite Wrestling, I was never going to be the manager of the Revival on a weekly television basis ever. Because that would require me being on the road on a weekly basis. You saw where they were doing television. One week they were booked in Newark. One week they were in Salt Lake City, for fuck's sake. I've been on an airplane twice in my life in the last 20 fucking years. Both times was to go to England for a variety of reasons. One was a large sum of money, and one of the bigger one was that my wife the first time had never been there before and wanted to go badly, and the second time had new friends and wanted to go back. Stacy has never been to Salt Lake City. I don't think she ever wants to fucking go. So I've said this in the past on the show. There's a bunch of new listeners. Yes, at one point in time, when I heard that this All Elite Wrestling was going to be a thing, after I talked to Tony Khan, I was not optimistic, as I've said, because of who he was going to be in business with. But there still would have been a time where I would have said, okay, for a pay-per-view, I'll do 2 or 3 weeks of television For a large sum of money, if I have to, I can drive to Salt Lake City. Flying still would have been an option. To build up to a pay-per-view just to piss those fans off, because that would have been a pop. And it helped get the Revival over and establishing a new company. Yes, I would have been open to that. Had the All Elite Wrestling Brain Trust proved me wrong about my original assumptions, which they didn't. Because from the very first pay-per-view and the Battle Royal, with the freak show and the vaudeville shit and the fucking guy with the hands in the pockets and the fucking small children and the people painted different colors and the fucking cat that chased the rat that ate the whatever the fuck. That closed that, and just the intrepid insipidness of Kenny Olivier and that smarmy, slappable face and all the gesticulating and finger pointing and all the other just goofy, unnecessary, independent outlaw mud show shit that they have done. And the fact that there are legitimate professional wrestlers out there who could get over and help a startup company on national television, and instead a bunch of high school buddies are out there playing wrestler. That's what closed that window for me. I have no interest whatsoever in being a part of it. So for everybody that always sends the tweets and emails, I love the Revival, no matter what name they're under. Those guys not only were wrestling fans, but they had the eye to see what the shit was supposed to be like and the dedication to train themselves to do it. And every time I have seen them, I haven't followed them weekly for the past 5 years, but every time I have seen them, they have had a great match and they have excelled at something that very few people can do well anymore at all. So, and I do agree that probably a manager would help them out, because if there is any weak point in their game, it may be the promo aspect. And I would love to have managed them in the old days when I was younger, if we were either in a territory where we could drive, or I still had the love of the wrestling business to put up with getting on planes, or whatever the case. But I'm not younger. I ain't going to fly. And as everybody knows that listens to this program, I would be insane to give up. That's another thing when everybody says, well, the so-and-so ought to bring you in. I even get still messages on my voicemail from people calling up saying, well, I'm running a show in such and such, and I want to bring you in. That's an old wrestling term, bring you in, book you, give you a job. I would be insane, as everyone knows, if I turned down and or stopped doing all the things I've been doing the last several years to just jump into a full-time wrestling job for somebody else again. So love the Revival, would love to manage them on a professionally run show against a nice team for the sake of the experience of doing it. I would have loved at one time to have done a limited number of a few appearances for a pay-per-view or some respect to help kick them off. But now I would be embarrassed to be involved in the dog and pony show that they apparently are going to. Some people have said, well, they ought to go to the NWA. They'd be a better fit there. I hardly think the NWA is going to outbid Tony Khan. I think I was the highest paid guy on the NWA roster except for Nick Aldis. And if I was the Revival, I wouldn't do that for the money they were paying me. So there you go. So this is, unfortunately, just because of timing and landscape, never been a thing that was going to happen regularly. So please, everybody, calm down and support the Revolt, manager or no, if they go to All Elite Wrestling and just full-on football kick the young fucks straighten the balls and just take their fucking belts and walk off. That's what I think should happen.
Well, I think as we talked about the other day, we don't have to worry about you managing them because I'm going to manage them. I'm going to manage the Revolt.
I don't believe that.
Swerve. Let me ask you.
Swerve, yeah.